Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Boston City Council's committee hearing on Planning, Development, and Transportation, docket number 0720, order for a hearing regarding an East Boston zoning initiative and master plan filed by District City Councilor Lydia Edwards. My name is Michelle Wu, and I'm proud to serve as an at-large city councilor as well as the committee chair. So first things first, how's the sound level? Can everyone hear? Yep. Folks in the back can hear too? Great. So if at any point something happens, just kind of wave and we'll fix it. I want to start off by thanking our staff, all the respective offices involved, Councilor Edwards and mine, as well as our central staff and our tech gurus. So Carrie will be here with us all night and has been here for hours preparing as well. So one round of applause for the staff, please. And I want to thank everybody, all the staff at the center, for making sure to extend the welcome to us here as well. I'm not going to say much. I'm going to turn it over to the lead sponsor to give an overview of why she filed the hearing. But I do just want to say thank you for taking the time to show up. If anyone ever had a question about whether East Boston cares about all the nitty-gritty details of planning and zoning and everything happening in the community, I know that you all represent even just a fraction of the folks who care, and we're already packing this room. So really the thanks goes to our lead sponsor here for taking the time to set up this forum, notify people about it, and invite everyone. We're going to talk about a lot of topics tonight, mostly centered around 4 different issues: planning and zoning, parks and climate resiliency, housing and affordability, traffic and transportation. So just to give an overview of how the evening will flow, my main job tonight is going to be timekeeper. So I'm going to be very strict because I know a lot of folks want to speak, and so just to be respectful of everyone's time, we want to keep you to the time limits allotted. I'm going to be harsh about that. We will start with our 2 elected colleagues from the State House. We're joined by State Representative Adrian Modero and State Senator Joe Boncore. We will then hear from a panel representing the city, the Boston Planning and Development Agency, Department of Neighborhood Development, Transportation Department, and actually multiple people from the Boston Planning and Development Agency. We will then go into community panels, hearing from a few community members on each of the topics described above, as well as some experts, and then hopefully wrap up all of the formally scheduled testimony by around 7:20 or so, and go into full public testimony for the rest of the hour. At that point, we'll ask folks to kind of line up in the order that you signed up on the sign-in sheets and get ready to testify at this microphone over here. I'll repeat those instructions when we get closer to public testimony. All you need to know now is that if you wish to speak, if you wish to testify, make sure to sign in on the right sign-in sheet about what topic you want to talk about in the back corner over there with our staff. So, and finally, before I hand it over, I do want to acknowledge that Councilor Kim Janey has joined us, as well as Councilor Anissa Asabi-George. And Councilor Ayanna Presley has staff in the room. She asked me to read her letter into the record. Dear Madam Chairwoman, I regret that due to a long-standing scheduling commitment, I will not be able to attend today's hearing. I want to thank the chair and the author of this order for elevating this critical conversation. As this district continues to be impacted by our city's development boom, we must ensure that the new growth and development of this community is shaped by residents strategically and not through spot zoning. It's important that we have a cohesive vision for this community that supports residents and businesses. I want to thank the Walsh administration and the BPDA for their work and look forward to continuing this conversation and working with Councilors Edwards and Wu and taking the next step towards accomplishing this goal. I will have staff present at the hearing and look forward to reviewing the tape. Again, Ronald, where are you? If you could wave your hand. Okay, so Ron's over here if you want to talk to Councilor Presley's office in particular. Did I miss anything? No? Okay, then at this point, I will hand it over to the lead sponsor, District Councilor Lydia Edwards.
Good evening, everyone, and I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. I wanted to echo the gratitude that Councilor Wu has extended to the central staff, who has worked not only hours but days trying to make sure that this was set up in a great way. I wanted to acknowledge that we are also putting this on Facebook Live. So for folks who cannot attend tonight, if you wanted to tell your friends and family that they can go to, I think, our Facebook page and watch this right now. It's being recorded as well, and that will be available tomorrow for people to watch. I just want to acknowledge some people who aren't here today, and also some service folks as well. We all miss the presence of Gina Scalcioni, who was the head of the Gove Street Civic Association. So I just want to acknowledge that this would have been a big deal for her, and she would have had a voice, and we certainly know she's here in spirit. Also, the work of many of our public safety officers is not without, it shouldn't go unacknowledged that many of them show up at our civic associations every single month. And as you know, we lost a public safety officer in Weymouth, Officer Michael Chesnut. I just want to acknowledge his passing in service to his community. So I just wanted to get that out there as well. Now, today's Boston, we're here to make sure that we're doing a bunch of things. But one thing I want to be clear is that we're not here to complain about what we don't like, what we don't want, and what we are upset about. Today is an opportunity to talk about how we're getting to yes in the community and future that we all want to see, where all of us feel that we have a voice, where all of us feel that we can come home, where all of us feel, honestly, that we have a future here in this beautiful community. That's what today is about. And so I'm inviting all of us to dream together and to talk about zoning and talk about our parks and talk about our community in ways what we see could happen and the potential here. And I want to thank the administration for coming. Most importantly for your leadership and also being willing to work with the community, honestly, and making sure that we bring about that community that all of us are excited to see. We have thus far been guided by zoning regulations that have expired in 2000, and it's very clear that they no longer are really reflective of our architectural standards, of our population, of the way that we are growing. And we need a new set of plans, and we need a new set of guidelines, and that's what the administration is going to help us build together. So I wanted to also extend incredible thanks and gratitude to, and I don't just say this everywhere I go, to Joe and to Adrian. I have said it many times before, but I am very lucky to have this delegation and to work with both of them. You were incredibly supportive from day one and have been there, and so I just want to thank you so much. So, a couple quick announcements. Anybody who needs translation, we are offering simultaneous translation in Spanish if you need that. A persona que habla español, que necesita ayuda, por favor habla con Ricardo or Claudia Sierra, who's available to help you with translation. Again, we have sign-in by topic, so if you want to talk about zoning, if you want to talk about parks, if you want to talk about traffic and parking, if you want to talk about housing, the sign-in sheets are over in the corner. And then finally, I believe Cindy will speak for the Board of Boards and any other heads of community groups who would like to speak here tonight that we may not announce or did not sign up. Is there anyone else? Okay. All right. That's it.
Great. Thank you very much, Councilor Edwards. Before we go to our state colleagues, I do want to give my council colleagues an opportunity to give a brief opening statement as well. I see Councilor Michael Flaherty is joining us and coming up. So we'll start in the order of arrival, just by a hair. Councilor Sabi George.
I'll be very brief because I think it's important to get to the meat of the meeting, but very happy to see such a large turnout and look forward to hearing all the panelists this evening from the administration as well as from the advocates, and then also public testimony, because that's often the last on the list, but certainly some of the most important voices happen during that public testimony. So I look forward to all of that, and we're all here.
Thank you, Councilor Sabi George. Councilor Janey.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to say thank you, many thanks to Councilor Edwards for sponsoring this really important conversation. There are similar conversations happening in my home district, so I'm happy to be here. I'm glad to see such a large turnout. These are really important issues as our city, different neighborhoods in our city are dealing with development issues, and it's really important that residents be at the forefront and have their voices heard. So it's really encouraging to see such a large turnout, and I'm looking forward to a really robust discussion and presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Janey. Councilor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and just happy to support my district colleague and offer any suggestions I can, not only as a citywide city council, but coming from South Boston, we've probably endured just about as much, if not more, development in the city. We argue that we're actually overdeveloped, and we feel that there's only so much you can stuff into one neighborhood. So I had recommended through the chair and also the lead sponsor that we may want to consider an interim iPod overlay, which has worked to sort of slow things down in my neighborhood. And there's things that come with that. It's obviously it does slow down development, but also it catches everything over 1,000 square feet. So the resident that wants to expand their own property, the resident that wants to remodel, they get caught up in it too. So there's two sides to it. I know from speaking from my neighborhoods, it was a breath of fresh air, and it literally restored some sanity to the development process. So I think that you guys are sort of on the forefront of that over here in East Boston. And I can speak that we feel that it's made a big difference, so much so that we've asked that it be extended, and it was just extended for another year with the BRA. So, and I know that, I see Mark is here, he gets probably speak more intelligently to what the iPod overlay does and doesn't do, but just be forewarned that if there's folks here that own a piece of property and you want to remodel your kitchen, you want to put you want to expand your living space and your footprint, that gets caught up in the iPod overlay too, which means it triggers a number of things for you to do that you normally wouldn't have to do because you have, as a matter of right, project. But with respect to bulldozing 1- and 2-family homes and replacing that with 6, 8, 10 units, that's what the iPod overlay does. It prevents that type of pillaging from happening in a neighborhood like this community. So here to add some value and also to support my district colleagues as your at-large councilor. It's great to see so many friends and neighbors. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. Now I'm going to turn it over to Senator Boncory. We've invited both our rep and senator to sit up here, but do not feel like you have to stay the whole time. You're welcome, though, as long as you'd like.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to you and your committee, I want to thank you all. Thank you for coming out to East Boston for this very important hearing. It's a very important issue for all the constituents, as you can sure tell from the turnout tonight. And so many of the council hearings and so many of the State House hearings, quite honestly, can be difficult for constituents to get to. So I think it's important that the timing of this meeting and the location of this meeting. So kudos to you. And to the major proponent of this legislation, Lydia Edwards, thank you for filing it. It's certainly needed in this community. And to all the other city councilors who have come out in support, and to the administration, thank you also for being here. Because we've seen master plans work. And we've seen master plans work, quite honestly, in this community 18 years ago when it was first filed, when East Boston needed growth, when East Boston needed new residents coming here, and East Boston needed an economic boost. And in some ways, East Boston has kind of been victim of their own success. So the time is right now to reconsider the master plan and consider to really address the broad impacts of this growth in our community and how it will also impact other issues, not only housing, but transportation and climate change. As its present rate of development, the city of Boston has more than met its fair share for the development of multifamily housing units and affordable units for working class and middle class families. And I want to thank personally the mayor and his administration for making the commitment to build 53,000 units in the city. I'm chair of the Senate's Housing Committee, and I can tell you that that is not the case in many municipalities around the Commonwealth. Most municipalities are downzoning. In fact, the city of Boston and maybe 3 other cities are building and zoning about 66% of the multifamily housing in the entire Commonwealth. So the city of Boston has surely done its fair share to keep middle class and affordable housing online and continue the great growth and success we've had in our economy. But we have to be thoughtful in our approach, because with that approach also has come in this community, housing prices risen over 52% since 2010. What's come with that great success is that more than half of our families in the city of Boston are rent burdened, meaning they pay more than a third of their income towards household expenses. And we can no longer sit by and watch zoning by variance becoming the standard by which our neighborhood is built. Without a planned approach to development, we will be unable to address the concerns of affordability, congestion, and retaining the strong cultural values that really define this community and have defined this community for hundreds of years. Rapid, Further rapid and uncontrolled development puts a strain on East Boston's transportation and infrastructure systems. With minimum headways on an adequate capacity in its present state, our Blue Line is among the most reliable transportation options on the MBTA system. However, without adequate planning for development and targeted investment, we will lose these advantages. A master plan should absolutely include opportunities for public and private investment to our transportation as a means of improving our infrastructure, reducing congestion, and increasing alternative modes of transit. So I really hope this master plan will include some room for private and public partnership. Finally, as a coastal community, I know full well that you will carefully consider ensuring that climate resilient development and the mitigations on our infrastructure are also met in this plan. East Boston is a community with a strong cultural history, and as a community grows, a master plan will ensure that East Boston remains accessible and affordable for all our families and residents. Again, thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm available for any questions or further input you may need.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Modero, maybe bring that microphone over this one, stretch.
Can everybody hear me? Wonderful. It's not usually a problem. First of all, Chairwoman Wu and members of the committee, thank you for hosting this important hearing. And in particular, thank you for having it right here in East Boston. I think when I was speaking with Councilor Edwards when she was first thinking about this, she envisioned a turnout just like this and making it accessible and inclusive and really starting off this process in a robust fashion from the community standpoint. And I think it paid dividends, and this is the proof right here. So I want to also thank all of you for coming and participating in this important discussion. East Boston is facing an era of unprecedented development. The neighborhood in which many of us grew up, and which others have more recently chosen to call their home, looks much different than it used to. This growth has allowed for exciting new opportunities, from improved infrastructure to new businesses and homes, to increased and enhanced green space and access to our waterfront. At the same time, many members of our community have become concerned about the pace of development and what it means for the fabric of East Boston. East Boston's development is currently guided by the last master plan created for our neighborhood, which was completed in the year 2000. Nearly 20 years later, this vision has become outdated and no longer reflects the reality in which the residents of East Boston live. I have long advocated for a new master plan which takes into account the present conditions in East Boston, the needs of our community, and the opinions of our residents. I would like to thank Mayor Walsh and the Boston City Council for their leadership on this issue, and specifically Councilor Edwards, who is a dear friend to this community, for organizing this hearing right here so residents of East Boston can stand up and make their voices heard. The master plan process must be robust and community-driven. East Boston residents need to have a seat at the table, and it is their vision for the future of the neighborhood which must guide its development. This process must be inclusive and transparent to ensure equitable participation with materials available to residents in multiple languages. The final plan must account for growth while maintaining the character of our neighborhood and the beautiful diversity of our community. Development must be balanced with a good mix of residential, retail, and commercial space to fit the changing needs of our population. The master plan must implement measures such as affordable housing to prevent displacement and pricing out of longtime residents and East Boston youth who want to remain in the neighborhood where they grew up. Preservation must be taken into account alongside the boom of new construction and the architectural character and diverse vernaculars of our streets preserved. The development of an updated master plan will provide East Boston with the clarity and guidance to carefully move forward in an age of rapid development. With a comprehensive, community-driven master plan, we can ensure that the fabric and character of our neighborhood is maintained and that private development and public infrastructure work in harmony. This process is an important step to realizing a lively, affordable, and diverse East Boston for years to come. I look forward to working with the city and the residents of East Boston in the coming months to grow and improve this amazing neighborhood we all call home. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative, and thank you again, Senator. As I said, feel free to stay and listen or from wherever you choose. We'll transition at this point to the administration panel. We are joined by Sarah Meyerson, Director of Planning from the Boston Planning and Development Agency, Chief Sheila Dillon, Chief of Housing for the City of Boston, Commissioner Gina Fiandaca, Commissioner of the Boston Transportation Department, and Rich McGinnis, Director of Waterfront Planning for the BPDA. I know that I saw Commissioner Christopher from the Inspectional Services Department here listening, so he's also available and omnipresent presence and throughout all of our neighborhoods, as well as Kim Tai, the General Counsel for ISD, is here as well. Am I missing any other departments who are represented? Neil, am I good? And Neil, of course, our intergovernmental relations guru here. So in whatever order, I'm going to hold this panel to 15 minutes with full respect and invite you to stay and listen as well.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you, councilors, for convening this important discussion regarding planning in East Boston, and thank you, Senator and Representative, for joining us this evening. My name is Sarah Meyerson, and I'm the Director of Planning at the Boston Planning and Development Agency. I'm joined here today by my colleague Sheila Dillon, Boston's Chief of Housing and Director of the Department of Neighborhood and Development, Gina Fiandaca, the Commissioner of the Boston Transportation Department, Rich McGinnis, the Deputy Director for Climate Change and Environmental Planning at the BPDA, as well as staff from across city departments who will be involved in the upcoming East Boston Planning Initiative. We all look forward to tonight's conversation as the start of a dialogue about shaping the future of East Boston. East Boston is experiencing a period of tremendous growth and change. East Boston's population grew by 17% from 2000 to 2015, compared to the city's growth rate of 10%. Last month, in response to the rapid pace of growth in East Boston and our shared concerns with the neighborhood, Mayor Walsh announced the upcoming launch of Plan East Boston. Guided by Imagine Boston 2030, the mayor looks to continue working in partnership with the community to ensure that in East Boston we preserve wisely, enhance equitably, and grow inclusively. Imagine Boston 2030 prioritizes inclusionary growth and, informed by community input from across the city, puts forth a comprehensive vision to boost quality of life, equity, and resilience in every neighborhood across the city. I first want to address what planning is and what it seeks to achieve. Under Mayor Walsh's leadership, planning is about developing a shared vision as a community. Planning centers around listening, cooperation, and productive dialogue. Planning will build on neighborhood strengths and guide resources to address challenges. Planning is intended to produce a framework to predictably shape the future of our neighborhoods, and planning necessarily includes trade-offs and compromise. Planning is a process that, in partnership with the community, establishes a roadmap to guide future development that preserves neighborhood diversity, is inclusive and accessible to a range of household incomes, benefits residents and businesses, and identifies which areas to preserve, enhance, and grow. Plan East Boston will be a comprehensive planning initiative facilitated by a planning team consisting of staff from across city departments. The planning team will work alongside the community of East Boston to determine a shared vision for the future development of the neighborhood. Together, we will prioritize maintaining the neighborhood's diversity and inclusivity by identifying strategies to create and maintain housing that is accessible to a range of income levels and provides pathways to opportunity. And we will shape the planning process by listening to the diverse perspectives of East Boston. As a team, we will work diligently to engage local residents and business owners, neighborhood associations and civic groups, and other stakeholders in setting priorities for Plan East Boston. East Boston is ready for updated planning. The neighborhood's most recent master plan was published 18 years ago, in 2000, and the neighborhood was last rezoned 27 years ago, in 1991. It is anticipated that the planning framework and future zoning changes will focus on 3 core strategies, as I mentioned: preserve, enhance, and grow. Elements for discussion will include preservation of existing residential fabric, enhancement of the vitality of existing residential communities and businesses, anti-displacement strategies for residents and businesses, connectivity along the waterfront, mobility, and flood protection and climate resiliency. We intend to kick off Plan East Boston early this fall. We will begin with a discussion about moving forward with an East Boston Interim Planning Overlay District, or IPOD, for East Boston's existing residential neighborhoods. An iPod, as mentioned earlier, is an interim zoning tool that is used to maintain increased public review and community voice in the evaluation of all proposed new development during the planning process. We are currently working to schedule a community meeting to discuss an East Boston iPod in September, and we hope to be able to announce a date soon. Given the collaborative nature of planning, we prioritize a meaningful process above a set timeline and end date. While each initiative has a unique set of questions it seeks to address, the process generally follows 4 key phases: inquiry, visioning, plan framework, and implementation. The inquiry phase focuses on listening to community stakeholders and researching and sharing relevant data about the neighborhood. The stories we hear and the data we collect will inform the scope of the planning initiative and will be instrumental in shaping the planning process for East Boston. The visioning phase establishes goals and priorities for the neighborhood and sets parameters for topics to be addressed in the plan framework phase. During the plan framework phase, the planning team will facilitate conversations to draft a plan consisting of recommendations for land use and open space, housing preservation and neighborhood character, economic development, climate resilience, mobility, and other planning topics that advance the plan's goals. Implementation is the final phase, where in close collaboration with all city departments, we draft guidelines, policies, and in many cases updated zoning to ensure that the broad goals of the planning initiatives are reflected in what ultimately gets developed. To close, I would like to reiterate that planning under Mayor Walsh is a participatory process with the community, is inclusive and accessible to a range of households, strives to benefit its residents and businesses, and identifies which areas to preserve, enhance, and grow, thus establishing a framework for our future. I hope that all of you who have joined us tonight will stay involved throughout the upcoming planning process. Chief Dillon, Commissioner Fiandaca, and Deputy Director McGinnis will now provide brief statements of how housing, transportation, and climate change policy will be incorporated into the planning process.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, councilors, and thank all of you for coming out this evening. For the record, my name is Sheila Dillon, and I'm Chief of Housing for the City of Boston. And I'm thrilled to be here as part of the Walsh administration to talk a little bit about housing, only for a few minutes. And there's so much more that we will be talking about through this planning process. We know that housing is a very important issue in East Boston, and we are anxious to support the BPDA and the community's effort in creating a plan that serves the people of East Boston and their associated housing needs. East Boston currently has 17,000 units of housing. Approximately 70% of households rent, while 30% of households are made up of homeowners. 2/3 of those homeowners are low and moderate income households that also have needs. 2,600 of the housing units in East Boston are deed restricted with lower than market rate rents and sales prices. There are approximately 575 mobile vouchers in use in East Boston. Combined, about 18% of these units are affordable to low and moderate income households. 18% is very close to the citywide average for affordable housing, but we know that it is not enough given the need in East Boston. Years ago, as many of you know, East Boston had housing that was, while maybe not deed restricted, it was affordable to many households at a variety of incomes. Today, that is not the case. The median sales price in East Boston across all housing types is $528,000. The average rent is $1,700. These rent and sales prices remain out of reach for many. So we are hoping, certainly in this plan, that we will talk about affordability and the community's vision. We also know that evictions in East Boston are low. We looked at this data recently. And while this may be very good news, we don't think that court data tells the whole story. We know displacements are happening. So as part of this planning exercise, we need to better understand displacement. While there is much to be concerned with, we also know that there are good, important developers here in East Boston that want to work with the residents. Two of them are here tonight. The East Boston CDC, represented by Al Caldarelli, and NOAA, represented by Phil Giffey. They right now have very important affordable housing developments underway. Coppersmith Village, Paris Street, and NOAA is buying a lot of the triple-deckers to keep them out of speculative hands and preserve the tenancies. So I'll conclude, that's just a snapshot of what we know to be true, but I really look forward to working with all of you through this process to design housing, to respond, to come up with housing plans for East Boston that respond to the community's needs and vision. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Edwards and Councilor Wu, for hosting this meeting in our community. I'm Gina Fiandaca. I am a lifelong resident of East Boston and your Transportation Commissioner. It is just a pleasure to be here back in East Boston. As many of you know, East Boston has experienced all of the benefits of the great economy that we have, but we've also experienced a lot of the challenges here, and I've experienced them along with you. The Transportation Department is well aware of all of the challenges that the residents of East Boston face on a daily basis, but we've taken several steps in our attempt to mitigate what is a very complex situation that's really the result of East Boston being sort of a crossover of traffic from the North Shore and experiencing the effects of the Logan Airport traffic. All of that is great news for the economy, but it certainly has strained our transportation systems. And programs that we have in East Boston that we've built upon center around responding to the residents' needs, implementing resident parking programs, installing rapid flash beacons, and implementing slow streets programs in an effort to make our neighborhoods safer and more walkable. But we know that these traffic impacts are simply felt on a daily basis by all of our residents here. So we've worked with all of our developers to identify what steps we need to take as they implement their projects and that they complement the needs of the residents. That includes, as Rich will talk about, water transportation. It includes fortifying our MBTA system and ensuring that it's an affordable, reliable system for all of our residents, that it is climate responsive. Working closely with our partners at the state level and with Massport, that that traffic that moves through East Boston can get through East Boston, and that residents here are not unduly impacted by that traffic passing through. And what has really become a recent concern, and that we hear about all the time in our efforts to respond to slow streets programs, is that there's a piece of technology here that we're all experiencing on a daily basis, and that impacts you with wayfinding applications. How do we integrate that with our traffic signal technology and our MBTA system and our bus rapid transit system? So a lot of that is talked about in Go Boston 2030, and that's why it positions the Transportation Department to work closely with the BPDA and with our other agency partners. We've done this planning effort. A hallmark of Go Boston 2030 early on was our public engagement process. There are folks here in the room that were intimately involved in that. All of you here participated in some way in that, and it wasn't an effort where we present a series of options to the community. It was actively soliciting your feedback. What's your vision for mobility? What's your vision for transportation? One of the reasons why we brought Hubway to Boston over the last 18 months into East Boston with 10 stations is because we heard loud and clear that we need alternatives for people to get around. So building on the success of Go Boston 2030 and the lessons that we've learned, we look forward to working closely with the community and with the BPDA and with, of course, our City Council. I'll turn it over to Rich McGinnis.
Thank you, and good evening. For the record, my name is Richard McGinnis, Deputy Director for Climate Change and Environmental Planning from the Boston Planning and Development Agency. East Boston was one of my first planning assignments when I started with the city back in 1996, so very familiar with the neighborhood, a big fan of East Boston, and it's good to be back. Climate change is already happening. We're seeing the effects daily through heat, island effect, extreme heat, flooding, precipitation, and coastal storms. Prompted by Mayor Walsh, the city developed Climate Ready Boston, a roadmap for understanding the vulnerabilities and protecting the city from the vulnerabilities of climate change. In less than a year, we've made climate resiliency central to all of our planning efforts, including Imagine Boston 2030, and we intend to do the same thing for Plan East Boston. East Boston is particularly vulnerable to extreme precipitation, so heavy rain events, snow events, but more importantly, coastal storms and sea level rise, as we saw this past winter. East Boston was specifically selected as the first coastal resilience solution planning project last year due to its vulnerable population and early flooding risks. Published last fall, this document provides design concepts for district-scale protections and early action items, including a deployable flood wall that was located, I believe, last week in the East Boston Greenway that will protect the Greenway and properties along the Greenway from coastal flooding. More extensive measures combining green and gray infrastructures and new open space that can be built throughout the years along the shoreline to protect the city from our projected 40-inch sea level rise and coastal storms. These measures include new waterfront open spaces with strategic elevated areas along the Greenway entrance, Pierce Park Phase 2, and Border Street in East Boston. I also want to announce that this fall, we're kicking off a citywide public process to develop zoning recommendations for a flood resilience zoning overlay district related to design guidelines and new construction and building retrofits to guide compliance for developments in future floodplains, including the East Boston neighborhood. All of this work will be included in Plan East Boston. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So just because I know my colleagues and I know we all could be here all night with just our own questions, because the stated goal of tonight was to listen to community and engage, and we still have a dozen community panelists scheduled to testify, plus several dozen who have signed up, I'm going to ask all my colleagues to put all your questions out in one round now, and then we're going to hand it over to the administration to answer it, because I think there will be recurring themes. So we'll do one sweep just asking questions. I'll take notes so I make sure everything gets answered, but we'll do us and then them, and then open it up to the panelists. Councillor Edwards.
I just had two very brief questions. One was about timing. When did you see the planning actually starting, and also about cost? And is there a planned budget to get this done?
Okay. Councillor Janey, any questions?
Just quickly, and as I said, my district, we face something very similar. We have a Plan Dudley process. That being said, I know every neighborhood has its own unique opportunities and challenges. I heard you mention Plan East Boston. I'm interested in learning more about that to see what lessons we can take. I know residents in my community have asked for something similar because there's just such a pressure with displacement and gentrification happening. But I'm really interested in learning more about the specifics of the Plan East Boston.
Thank you. Councillor Flaherty?
That's probably a question and maybe a comment to Rich McGinnis. Just correct my memory. Other than the South Boston rezoning, East Boston was probably the last comprehensive rezoning that took place in the city.
Other neighborhoods, Dorchester, Fenway.
Smaller sections, but not neighborhood-wide, correct?
Just wait, Rich. We're going to batch all the questions. I know. Yeah.
All right.
I'm taking notes, Michael.
And then for the community's edification, and my recommendation would be get real familiar with FAR, which is floor area ratio, height and density. Recognize that parking and required parking could help you control the density. And I would caution when BRA likes to go into smaller groups, they like to do charrettes, and just make sure that people introduce themselves and where they're from and what entity or organization they represent, because oftentimes some folks can sort of take over a meeting and push their own agenda, which may be inconsistent with the community's agenda. And lastly, when we rezoned South Boston, what we failed to do is we failed to put in a minimum lot size. And I would strongly recommend that East Boston require that the BRA put a minimum lot size. And what that happens is that if you have a single family or a two-family that's on a large lot, if you don't have a minimum lot size, that allows the developer to bulldoze that beautiful one or two-family home and replace it with 8, 10, 12, 14 units, which packs them in. And lastly, despite the fact that the BRA will allow the permits, and they'll continue to allow the permits, the MBTA doesn't increase service. And so you'll have what we have in our neighborhood, which is we're at a saturation point with overdevelopment, and you have 60, 70, 100 people at a street corner waiting for transportation, and then one bus goes by, two buses goes by, three buses go by. Forget about, getting a seat. You're lucky if you get on. Then what happens is everyone pulls out their device, and then Uber and Lyft will just sort of descend on East Boston like it does in South Boston, causing all kinds of gridlock and traffic. So again, from experience, I would throw that out to you, having been down this road, and as a result of some of the missteps we made as a community, just sort of trying to get up to speed, we came to the BRA, and we got a zoning change, which allowed us to have the interim iPod overlay, which was really a saving grace, and thankfully the mayor was supportive, and thankfully the BRA was supportive of that, and it worked so great that we've got an extension on it. So if you can learn from some of that process and from those issues, I think that East Boston will be well served.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Sabi George?
Thank you. Very quickly, I just want to reiterate the timeline question. I think that's really important when we talk about Plan East Boston. But then also, I'd like to understand what targets we may set or are ideal to set, thinking about the ownership versus rental proportions or ratios. What does a different proportion mean in any given community, but East Boston in particular? And then also just reiterating the importance, I think, of business to be included in supporting small businesses that exist here already, and how do we support their growth locally within this community in particular.
Thank you. All right, so I have notes, but I see you taking notes too. It sounds like details on Plan East Boston, but timing and cost in particular.
So I'll kick it off, and then please feel free to join in here. In terms of the timing, we anticipate that we will launch the Plan East Boston this fall. We'll launch with a meeting specifically to discuss the iPod. I think from the experience that we had in South Boston, the iPod is an effective tool, and we think it will be an effective tool in East Boston as well. So commencing that with a conversation about the iPod in September, and we hope to have a specific date to announce with that very shortly. In terms of how long the process it will take itself, as I mentioned, there's 4 phases. And what we have learned from our past planning processes is it's really impossible to predict exactly how long that will take. We want to make sure that we allow for the robust conversation and dialogue, and we allow for all of the issues to be addressed. So we certainly don't want this to drag on in perpetuity, and we do want to make sure that we come to an end point, but we don't want to put any sense of a prescriptive end date on it now. What I can say is that there will be a process where we discuss all of these issues and make sure that it's comprehensive, so that it's not just focused on purely on land use, but that we're also having conversations around affordability, around displacement, around transportation, which is so key to make sure transportation and accessibility and mobility are lining up with any increases in density, and climate resiliency, which is incredibly important here in East Boston. So we really will make sure that this is comprehensive in nature and incorporates all of those. In terms of cost and budget, currently we do have a budget that is specifically allocated to the plan initiatives in the planning budget. I can get you the specific numbers later, Counselor. But we do have that for this plan, as well as the plans that were announced in Mattapan, downtown, Newmarket, and then mobility planning in Alston-Brighton. So there's budget allocated for all of those. What we intend to do is, through the inquiry phase, we will work with the community to determine the exact nature and scope of this plan. And then if we need to bring on consultants, which we anticipate we will, for certain specific subject areas, we will then bring on those consultants. So there may be consultants we need to bring on as it relates to zoning with climate resiliency, transportation planning, economic development. We will figure out exactly with the community through the scoping process which sub-consultants will enhance everyone's understanding and full comprehension of potential opportunities and possibilities. In terms of, there was a bit of a question about what we've learned from past planning processes and how we can use this in other neighborhoods. I think one thing that we have seen in the Harrison-Albany district right now, which has new zoning, is a particularly good case of this, is that updated zoning can be a very effective tool for regulating more predictable outcomes for development. In Harrison-Albany, you had updated zoning, which has led to a number of approved projects that are conforming with that zoning and has led to that predictability, which we found to be particularly effective. We've also learned that it's important to be regional in our advocacy. It was mentioned a little bit in the earlier statements that challenges around gentrification, displacement, they're not just challenges for the city of Boston, they're challenges for our region, and so we need to think about both what our city is doing, but how can we also be effective in advocating regionally for what we need. And then we've learned that we need to continue to be more nimble, more collaborative, and look for other ways to have our processes so that it's not just charrettes, but that we're also getting out into the community. We're doing walk shops, bike shops, thinking about neighborhoods in different ways, and continually trying to be creative with how we're engaging a full, robust range of community stakeholders, businesses, homeowners, renters, and those who might not be able to attend a typically scheduled meeting. So this is an effective tool to be out in the community in the evening. We'll try to find times when we can have pop-ups, when we're here at off hours, when we're here on the weekends, so that there's really a range of ways to engage with us. We're also very open to suggestions on that engagement and would love that to be a part of this initial part of the planning phase. In terms of the supporting small businesses, absolutely, that's an element of this. This is about existing businesses and displacement of businesses as much as we want to make sure we're addressing any displacement and needs of residents and looking at both sides of that. Is there anything else anyone else wanted to add? Anything I'm missing on that list?
I think Chief Dillon might get it, but targets for rental versus ownership.
So those are the current targets right now in East Boston, and they're not too different than the city overall.
The 70-30 you mentioned?
What's that?
The 70-30?
70-30, yeah, it's pretty similar to the city. What we are seeing is as rents increase, more and more of the smaller multifamilies are being bought by investors, and Mayor Walsh has asked us recently to really start looking at, again, with more of a focus on how we make more of Bostonians homeowners to stabilize our neighborhoods. So we will be working on that initiative and certainly want to feed that information into this process as well.
Just to briefly address some of Councilor Flaherty's issues that he raised. We were fortunate that Mayor Walsh added additional staff to the Transportation Department budget this year and additional funds. We will be hiring a transit team, and we will be hiring additional planners specifically to deal with new technology, and that includes the advent of wayfinding apps, managing Uber and Lyft, pick-up drop-off zones, transit signal priority and new traffic signal technology, as well as automated vehicles. So we anticipate having the resources necessary to support this effort and to make those resources available so that this is successful for this community.
And I'll just add one other component here. Councilor Flaherty was very helpful in highlighting some of the key tools that we will look at through this process as it relates to FAR, height, density, parking ratios, lot size, all those things that will be discussed as concepts early on in the planning process so that there really is capacity building and everyone understands the range of tools that we have in zoning and then also through planning guidelines that can be effective in helping us move forward here. So we do want to make sure that this is as much about making sure that community understands the full set of tools and then understanding where we apply that toolkit.
Great, thank you. The final question that was passed over was just, this is for all, the boundaries are all of the neighborhood, correct? Not specific?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you to our administration panel. I know that you all have very busy schedules, but each of you has staff in the room. So if staff representing one of the chiefs or department heads, could please raise your hand. I know there are folks in the room, so come find those folks who will be here for the entirety of the hearing. Thank you again for staying. So we'll transition now into the community panels. The first one is on planning and zoning. Councilor Edwards and I had coordinated to make sure that each of the civic associations were invited to speak. Not everybody wanted to, so some have submitted written testimony. So I believe the folks who will be joining us in this order are Cindy Baxter from Jeffreys Point Neighborhood Association. If you could make your way up to this microphone to my right. I am told that Teresa Malionek may not want to speak, but you're invited to from Gove Street. And Deborah Cave and Hernani D'Araujo from Eagle Hill Civic Association will be up to wrap us up on this portion. And everyone, I'm going to turn on my timer with an alarm for 2 minutes each.
Councilor Wu, Councilor Edwards, thank you very much. I'd like to make a quick correction. I actually am Cindy Baxter representing the Boston Neighborhood Association Board of Boards. I'm pleased to announce that we have been working for over 9 months as 6 collective neighborhood associations working on our common goals, because individually we realized in the December-January timeframe that single blades of grass aren't heard as much as everybody working together. What we are doing, and I'd ask that every neighborhood association director please stand up and or raise your hand so people know who you are. We've made a commitment to work for the neighborhood and roll up our sleeves. And in March of this year, we approached the city and said that there's an opportunity for both of us. What we have done is we've submitted written testimony that has our priority details. Please check it out online. If you can't get online, we will happily, at your association meeting, make tons of copies. en inglés y español, no importa qué idioma que quieras. And what I'd like to do is summarize for my 2 minutes starting now.
My clock says 45 seconds left, Cindy, but we'll
The
give you a
East
little allowance.
Boston Board of Boards has formed a director coalition with development and planning as a critical initiatives. As mentioned, we've already worked with the city, and we're pleased to review a summary of our priorities that we've already communicated. In support of the public hearing, we'd like to talk about our initiative to work closely on the master development plan and rezoning effort. Here are the priorities that we're summarizing. First, we're looking for an immediate call to action to preserve and protect key areas across East Boston that we will identify with the city agencies and our city councilors together. Rezoning consideration that thoughtfully supports the master plan, giving opportunity for affordable housing, parking strategies, transportation updates, and other necessary infrastructure. This consideration must be managed tightly to avoid the current building-by-building development patchwork. Environmental and resiliency coordination that unites the available organization resources, including us, the city, and other groups that already are making inroads for green and resilient East Boston. We propose to use our united approach to give the city a single focus point. It is the single focus point that we've started to and will continue to leverage. We'll work towards common processes and communications. We will not always have the same priorities across each individual neighborhood association, but we'll work together on those areas of unity while fostering unique attributes through this common platform as well. In return, the East Boston Board of Boards wants not only education from the city on understanding city processes and working together, we are hoping for transparency on tactics and strategy, frequent communications, and action sooner as well as later. To accomplish this, we ask the city to provide a dedicated project manager who will work end-to-end with us, coordinating across the city agencies to break down barriers in getting this master plan completed, documented, and rezoned. We are pleased to work with the city and our councilors, and we don't want development to steam ahead, robbing us of this incredible collaborative opportunity. Thank you for allowing us to present.
Thank you very much, Cindy. So while I agree that deserves a big round of applause, I think each one will deserve applause. It's going to start eating into some of the time, so I'll ask folks just to please reserve the accolades for after every panel. We can clap for everyone who spoke. Teresa doesn't want to speak. Deborah? Okay, so as Deborah's coming up, I do want to acknowledge that Tom Glynn from Massport did send a letter saying he was unable to join, but that Massport is very interested in participating with the city stakeholders in and the East Boston community on this matter. We look forward to hearing the priorities of the neighborhood, and that staff will be in attendance. I think I saw Liz Delarusso somewhere. Oh, there's a whole team here. Jay Ruggiero, Anthony Guarino, and Liz are all here in the back corner over here. Deborah, please.
On behalf of the Eagle Hill Civic Association, I'd like to thank our city councilors for bringing this hearing to East Boston, in particular Councilors Wu and Edwards. Thank you. Well, I'm going to address the 4 issues that we hear most when we have Eagle Hill Civic Association meetings. And by the way, Eagle Hill has been around now as an association since the 80s, the late 80s. So these are ongoing themes. So one of the first is, with development, we'd like to see our beautiful historic homes be respected. We do not want to see them torn down. We don't want to see all of the beautiful details be destroyed. We want to see the beautiful buildings be respected in our community. We've had good luck working with a lot of developers on Eagle Hill, but there are times when it appears that we're working together, and then the finished product is a disappointment. So we're looking to the city to support us with making that happen. The other thing is, We don't want to see development that tears down mature trees on Eagle Hill. This community is really suffocating. We need trees, and when we have beautiful mature trees, why would we tear them down to extend a house to another 2 or 3 families? We don't need to do that. Every yard is being scooped up. Every green space is being scooped up. So we have got to look at responsible development. So again, we're looking to the city to help us with this. Not only saving the mature trees, but planting trees every time there's a development. New trees should be planted. Also, we'd like to see the benefits of development stay local. We'd like to see local people hired for the work and for the materials that are used. Michael, I did hear what you said about, I don't know the term that you used, but this is what I'm trying to get at. You used a term in terms of expansion. What was that?
The interim iPod overlay?
Anyway. I think we have a lot to learn from South Boston, and I really hope that, we can talk more about this. And finally, it's the issue of parking. Listen, I love bicycles. I love to ride my bicycle. And we know that we have Zip cars, and we know that we have Ubers, and we have Lyft. But the reality is, people own cars, and they want to know where they're going to park them. And how can we have a unified community when people are fighting over parking spots? So we as a community and as a city, because I know this is not just an East Boston issue, we've got to come up with a comprehensive plan to deal with parking. And that's it for Eagle Hill. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Again, I know everybody's going to be brilliant, but we really want to reserve applause, so I'm going to keep trying to rein us in. I also want to point out that Gabby sitting here has folders of different colors, so speakers will know when the yellow goes up, you have 30 seconds left, and then red is time. So next up, again, did Ernani want to speak? Ernani? Oh. Thank you. So then we'll invite up Tom O'Brien from HYM Investments. No clapping before or after.
My family in the crowd. So thank you very much, members of the council, members of the State House delegation. So for people in the room, my name again is Tom O'Brien. The name of our company is the HYM Investment Group. We are the owners, together with an investment group, of Suffolk Downs. It's a 161-acre site, as people know, partially located in East Boston and partly located in Revere. About 40% of our site is in Revere. About 60% of the site is in East Boston. We've been working on this site for over 2 years. We started on it when the site was still owned by the previous group that ran the racing there, and we closed on the purchase of the site in May of 2017. So we've been involved in a probably at least 18-month effort to conduct a really strong community process, and our objective is to build a vibrant, transit-oriented, environmentally enlightened, mixed-use community. That's our effort. That's really what we're trying to do. We're, as I said, a Boston-based company, so you'll know us by some of the other large, complicated projects that we work on. These kinds of large projects are exactly what we do. So we are the people who are responsible for redeveloping the Government Center Garage, which is the big, ugly garage that exists in downtown Boston. We're right in the midst of the first phase of that. We're beginning the second phase about 12 months from now for that garage. We're also the people who took on the redevelopment of Boston Landing, which is the creation of the new headquarters for New Balance on the Massachusetts Turnpike, and the creation of the Bruins facility there, and the new residential building, all those things that are going on there. In addition to that, we took on the redevelopment of North Point, which is the former rail yard that's located in East Cambridge, partially in East Cambridge, partially in Somerville. So we've done all those pieces. So if I could, I see already that the timing is up. So what are our principles? What are we trying to do? First is, we decided from the get-go that we wanted to make sure that we dedicated ourselves to an extensive and intensive community process. So at this point, we've probably done 300 meetings. Many of you have seen my face. Many of you have seen our presentation. Many of you have seen our presentations multiple times. So we've done over 300 meetings, I think, in the last 18 months. So that's first, dedicate ourselves to a strong public process. The second is housing. So as the mayor's team and all the councilors here pointed out, the effort for us is really led by an opportunity to create housing on this site. There are no sites, literally no sites in the greater Boston area in which you can build housing in the scale that we can build housing here. We can build between 7,500 and 10,000 units of housing. So for us, the key part of that is in a supply-constrained market where we desperately need more housing, this gives us a huge chunk of the 53,000 units of housing, as was mentioned previously, that the mayor has committed to create by 2030. So that's a big piece of who we are. Open space. So we, from the very beginning 2 years ago, decided that we would dedicate fully 25% of this site to open space. So that means 40 acres of open space out of 161 acres. That's what we've committed to, and we've stuck to that right from the get-go. So what that means, just to kind of put it in perspective, in terms of open space per resident at Suffolk Downs, we'll have probably about 3 times the amount of open space at Suffolk Downs as the rest of East Boston has in terms of open space. And all of that open space will be public. We're not playing games in terms of streets or sidewalks or all that kind of stuff. It's all public, and we'll have huge chunks, a 15-acre Central Park, a variety of other things. I invite you to our website to look at that or to come to one of our presentations. Next is transit-oriented development.
Okay, we're going to do 30 more seconds, Tom.
Transportation. So we focus on transit-oriented development, bikes, pedestrians, all those things. Sustainability and environmentally resilient. We've done this a number of times, but this gives us a chance to do it from the get-go, to make sure that our site is sustainable and resilient right from the get-go. Retail. We want the retail to be neighborhood-oriented retail, and we've committed to fully 10% of our retail will be available at a lower cost for existing retailers. Civic spaces. We want to make sure that the civic spaces that we create are also important in public. If I could just, Counselor, just one more thing on schedule. So for us, as I said, we started 2 years ago. We bought the site 18 months ago. We filed our first notification form in November of last year. We're now in the process of creating a DPIR, which will be filed this summer, and we look forward. Please come to more of our meetings. Many of you know who we are, but we'd love to have more process. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we will transition now. So, okay, now we can do one round of applause for the Planning and Zoning panel. Thank you. Moving now into Parks and Climate Resiliency. So we've invited Magdalena Ayed from the Harbor Keepers, John Walkie from Green Roots, and Chris Markey from Friends of the East Boston Greenway. So in that order, if you could make your way over to the microphone.
Good evening, audience and members of the council and delegation from the state and everyone's here. Thank you for this opportunity. I'll be as brief as I can. I know everybody's rushing to get home. The Harbor Keepers is out there in the community every day helping to build coastal resiliency of the families and neighborhoods in East Boston, and we foster environmental stewardship on a daily basis. We also document a lot of the climate impacts, and we see the changes over time in specific coastal areas. We see with our own eyes and we witness the increased flooding and storm impacts, the water encroaching on land right here, in fact, right here in this building, right behind this building right here. In the last 2 storms this winter, the water was high and the children were in the school, so it was really impacting. We see the water encroaching on land, putting whole neighborhoods, people, and property in East Boston at grave risk. We really, from our perspective, from what we see, we're not really prepared and equipped to suffer the impacts of a major storm, nor to mitigate increasing impacts. Hence, we cannot stress enough how urgent of a matter it is that the City of Boston, the state, and our regional partners and governance funnel as many resources to East Boston to mitigate those climate impacts. We really need to seize every opportunity for development to implement resilient shoreline solutions. We need to improve our stormwater infrastructure and drainage system. We need to increase urban tree canopy, as my colleagues have said. And we also need to improve waterfront access and fortify the shoreline built environment, as well as guarantee that the Belle Isle Marsh remains a protected reservation. Every time a project comes through for permittal, we really need to seize the opportunity to mandate that development projects through zoning reforms, hopefully through this East Boston plan, are built to the highest resilient standards that won't just serve as buffers to mitigate flooding, sea level rise, and extreme precipitation, but that also create opportunities for economic improvement of our neighborhood, thereby improving the quality of life overall for East Boston. We really shouldn't be waiting until all the plans are on the table to support, capacitate, and fund organizations like ours and many others that are really connected to the people of East Boston and really understand the true needs of the community and who really are out there every day doing deep-rooted community engagement. organizations like ours. We have the trust, we have the wherewithal and the experience to do that part. So let's all, let's put all the CRB initiatives that are already done on a fast track to implementation through this East Boston Master Plan. An improved and cohesive, comprehensive East Boston Master Plan could be the cornerstone and the catalyst of building coastal climate resiliency while providing opportunities for all, and could also serve as a teaching tool for the community on climate resiliency. So, as Councilor Edwards reiterated, let's not pinpoint, let's really put our heads together here as we develop this plan. And let's fortify the partnerships, let's build collaborations, let's find all the resources that we can possibly get and support groups on the ground that can help in the planning and implementation of this master plan to build a better East Boston for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, John Walkie from Green Roots.
Thank you to the council and to everyone involved in putting this together. So my name is John Walkie. I'm an Eagle Hill resident. For the past 12 years, I've been involved in environmental activism along the Chelsea Creek as part of the Chelsea Creek Action Group, and now currently as the Waterfront Initiative Coordinator at Green Roots, a group that's been working and partnering with groups from East Boston and residents on both sides of the creek. I've submitted a larger list of comments, but I'll just focus on a couple of salient points. And I should say Green Roots is an environmental justice organization, so we are very big on process. So I was very happy to hear some of the discussion about going beyond charrettes and the Go Boston 2030 process of engaging people, because that is really the getting out and doing door-to-door work is really critical for getting people involved. Because right now, I'm so happy to see the couple hundred people that we have in the room here tonight, but realistically, we are all the usual suspects. We are many of the same people who care enough to attend civic association meetings and whatnot, and there's a whole other realm of people, and I can tell you from experience, we've been going door to door, knocking this past year in the winter, going door to door around Eagle Hill and asking about a particular project that people might be aware of, an Eversource electrical substation being proposed on the banks of the creek. And when we ask people about it, they have no idea what we're talking about. And these are people, many of them Spanish-speaking, some of them English-speaking, but they have no clue. And when you talk to them about some of the other projects around, they have a vague notion of what they are, but public outreach and community outreach engagement is really difficult. And we're not going to sit there and nitpick at the BPDA and say you've done a horrible job, or the city, you've done what's required. But for this process, we have to go beyond that. And I'm willing to offer all the assistance that Green Roots can provide to engage people in this process, so that we get a much more realistic engagement around a set of principles that we can use to guide, principles that are coming from the community to guide the priorities in our development. And in terms of the priorities in the development, the right one's been shown. Just in terms, everyone's seen the pictures of people kayaking down Lewis Street and whatnot, but also I should note that Condor Street was flooded and closed to the public a couple of times this past winter. There was flooding in the Eagle Square area during the summer from a sudden downburst. And so for some of the projects that have been put into motion, they really do not fit very well with a lot of the talk we've been hearing about climate resiliency. And I think if there's something like an interim iPod or an interim iPhone or whatever you want to call it, that can sort of say, let's stop this for a second and say, does this make sense knowing what we know today, even if it was permitted a decade ago? Okay,
Thank
I'll
you.
stop there. Thank you.
Great. And Chris Markey, Friends of East Boston Greenway. Adrian tells me to be extra strict with your time.
Thank you very much. And I might agree with John about process. First of all, my comments for the Friends of the East Boston Greenway. East Boston is the center of Boston's current residential building boom between Suffolk Downs, which will provide 10,000 units of housing, our waterfront, and the countless infill parcels in East Boston. 20% of the 53,000 units of housing promised by Mayor Walsh will be built here. The city hundreds of acres of disused industrial land in East Boston and Chelsea will make the Lower Mystic the main growth region for the city over the next 20 years. In that time, East Boston's population will nearly double. Traffic will grow, and pressure on our too limited open spaces will mount. The city must be an active and engaged advocate for East Boston's streets, plazas, squares, parks, urban wilds, harbor walks, and other public open spaces, now already overcrowded and underfunded, to be developed as part of a vision which balances climate resilience, recreation, housing, economic, and urban planning needs at the same time. It's a complicated job, Examples of such collaborative and complex problem-solving, however, exist all over the world. However, in Boston, funding and implementation are not on our horizon, and we need to fix that. The city should collaborate with state agencies, the private development community, and the people of East Boston to develop a layered, comprehensive overlay approach to address the serious challenges we face. So thank you for BPDA. I appreciate that you're already there. I would be remiss if I did not mention that East Boston is a community with a base of residents who play soccer, yet we do not have a single dedicated full-size soccer facility in the neighborhood. All soccer fields at present are shared with other sports, putting undue strain on permit holders and resulting in conflict. Along with improved planning, funding for adequate management, programming, maintenance, and development of open spaces, tree canopy goals have been mentioned here tonight, and they're super important. They must be made a high priority, and we need to have action on that front, as should speed management on our streets, which are too often used as dangerous and fast-moving commuter avenues. These are all part of the open space picture in East Boston. Lastly, I'd just like to thank Councilor Edwards and Wu and the city councilors who are here and the administration for coming and for giving us the opportunity to comment on this East Boston's open space needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Round of applause for our Parks and Climate Resiliency panel. Moving next into housing and affordability, we'll call up Phil Giffey from NOAA, Al Caldarelli from East Boston CDC, and Andres del Castillo from City Life Vida Urbana.
Let me get my glasses on, I have that condition. Councilors and representatives, thank you for asking Al and I, among others, to participate in this hearing. You know, housing and climate affect all of us. I recall a couple of months ago we had 300 people in here talking about climate change and whatnot. I won't go into that, but NOAA does a lot on that, and hope to continue working with you as well. So housing, which I'm going to primarily address, affects all income levels, from very low income people to millennials. We're all in the workforce. But the climate for climate and the climate for housing at the national level is low, except I think at the congressional level and certainly in the city of Boston. I'm going to say the city and the states are taking charge of these issues. We have a great mayor, we have a great governor. The housing bond bill, thank you, Senator Boncore, was terrific for all of us. But we don't see the same kind of investment at the federal level. I don't want to be too political, but we need that kind of support at both levels. So any handshake with an autocrat from another nation that says sea level rise isn't going to happen is not accurate. So we need to work together. If those guys at that level aren't going to work together, then certainly the housing groups and the boards of boards will show us the way. There are a lot of issues out there. I understand zoning reform is one of them. It has been for a long time, Jack. I remember when we were on the Planning and Zoning Advisory Commission X number of years ago. I won't say how long, but I had more hair. It was a different color. And then in the 90s, there was another master plan. So we've been through these kind of things before. They're all important. They all lead in a positive direction. And I think that hopefully this one will as well. So in my mind, density and height are acceptable only if they provide more affordability. And there could be a wide range of people who get to be in those units, from homeless people to people up to 120%, maybe even a little bit more. But I think speed and efficiency, when you get into the system, you've got to have people who are supported. You can't just say we have a nice policy and a nice procedure. You've got to be effective with these kind of things, because time is money. Ask any developer, ask anybody if you're doing your house. You don't just get to say this is going to take a few years. All the great climate work we're doing, it's going to take time. And I think we want to build a climate for investment. So when we talk about these kind of things, these are important, because in the end, they're going to cost money. This is not going to be something where we come out of a little bit of a checkbook. We have to be together. If we are together, the city will raise money, the mayor will tax people, the governor will tax people, but it isn't going to be for free. For all these solutions that we're talking about, it's actually going to cost money. I do want to talk about, I haven't seen any signs. I'll keep talking, Gabriella. Just keep yellowing up there. Okay, it's yellow.
Up, Phil.
Yellow. Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay,
I
30 seconds.
Anti-displacement, I think, Counselor, is one of the big issues right now. It's more like the expiring use problem, which used to be, we put a lot of money into stopping big developments from being turned over or flipped by people who have a lot of money, kicking out low-income people and sending them elsewhere. As Sheila, fortunately with the mayor, have invested in a program that Al and I are a part of. We're buying 3 deckers in the neighborhood. We need to do a lot more of that kind of thing in our community, and I think citywide. It needs to be impactful, citywide, fair, and immediate, and we need federal capital as well. But I think that we need to create something big, not something small. So we used to have, and Michael will remember this, 1,000 rooms campaign. We need to have 1,000 buildings campaign. It's got to be big. If we're talking about keeping people in the neighborhoods, not just building new, as great as Coppersmith really is, or as Paris Street, we need to invest in these kind of things, and we know they're not cheap. So I think that on the record, anti-displacement and the mayor are on the record as supporting. I think so is the governor, but we need a lot of money to make that kind of thing happen so we can save people from being displaced and moving to other communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. Al Caldarelli, East Boston CDC.
Well, when we talk about affordable housing, what we're finding now is that the affordable housing that we have, right now, we at the CDC have stopped taking applications. It's a 5-year wait if you wait for one of the units we have, and we have over 500 units, and yet it's a 5-year wait if you want to get into one of our developments. And when we look at the applications that are coming in, a lot of people look at affordable housing and they think about, oh, you know, these homeless people, this, that, and everything else. The bulk of the applications are coming in from families which have family incomes of $50,000 to $60,000. That's today the definition of affordable housing. These are people who are presently in their apartments were paying $1,000, $1,200, and the rents have gone to $2,500, and it's forcing them out. And these are the applications that we're getting. Now, the city might show that when you get those applications that there's not a lot of evictions. That's true, because when they're under the threat of eviction and when they think they're going to be evicted, after several months of going through that process, they just leave. And that's what East Boston is losing. Hard-working families who are raising children here, who respect the law, who respect what East Boston was all about and the whole history of East Boston. So when we talk about affordable housing and what has to be done, we have to find a way to support housing that will support those families, where will give them the opportunity to continue to live in East Boston, and zoning that will not displace them by the tearing down of units the way it's happening today. Thank you.
Thank you. Perfect timing.
Hi, everybody. My name is Andres del Castillo. I'm from City Life Vida Urbana. City Life is an anti-displacement organization, so we deal with tenants who are facing displacement. And I couldn't have put it better than Al. I mean, folks who have been raising their kids in this community can't afford to be in this community anymore. And there are a bunch of things affecting that. We also have a lot of investors and corporate landlords who are asking folks to move in without kids. And unless it's something in writing or unless it's something super concrete that folks can prove, it's really hard for families to have any immediate recourse when they're not able to find housing, when they're put at a disadvantage because they are families. And so that's one of the things. I think it's also true that, you know, if families that are making $50,000 to $60,000 a year are the ones applying to the list, what is happening to the families that are making less, which is a great number of families in our neighborhood and in our community. I grew up going to the Holy Redeemer. The East Boston Neighborhood Health Center was my health center my whole life. This, in a lot of ways, has been my community growing up. I identify a lot with East Boston, and I identify a lot with the community in East Boston. And so it's very hard for me personally, not just professionally, to see what is occurring in East Boston, because it is a beautiful community. It has a lot to offer, and it has a lot to show the rest of this city and even the rest of this state. And in order to do that, we have to preserve the fabric of the community that we've had. And so for City Life Vida Urbana, one of the main ways that we focus on suggesting what that looks like going forward is in anti-displacement, we can't just talk about the creation of new affordable housing units. One, because before that, we have to have a conversation of what really means affordable, because we have current affordability rates that a lot of residents cannot access. And second, it is really important to recognize that so outside of the fact that residents can't afford what we're considering affordable, as Al was pointing out, residents are leaving before, we call it a displacement because of the pressures that they see, because they don't want a housing record on their record, right? Because they don't want to go through the court process, because court can be really intimidating, particularly in an administration that has immigration customs enforcement inside courthouses, right? So I think it's really important for us to recognize the pressures that our community is in, and the fact that we all have a really common goal in having a very beautiful and very united and very welcoming East Boston.
Thank you very much. A hand for this panel. Our last panel, community panel before public testimony, will be on traffic and transportation. So I'd like to invite up Joe Aiello. I think I saw Joe, chair of the MBTA's Fiscal Management and Control Board and a former East Boston resident. Joe will be followed by Alice Brown from Boston Harbor Now.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm originally from Mount Carmel Parish. Proud former center, believe it or not, on the CYO basketball team, even at my short height. Here to talk a little bit about the T. This is a great time to be thinking about mass transit. The Massachusetts Department of Transportation is going to be issuing on Monday a draft of what is called the Focus 40 plan. So the Focus 40 plan is envisioned to be thinking about what the world of transportation should look like in the year 2040. There's going to be a public process to weigh in online and in meetings. And I would encourage everybody that's here at this meeting, as well as your networks, to let us hear from you about what you want. Some of the big issues that we've been hearing from with respect to your elected officials certainly are the blue to red connector, taking the blue line down to Charles Street. It's important that your voice be heard. If you look at what happened in Somerville with the extension of the Green Line, called the GLX project, that community bound together for a long period of time and fought single-mindedly for that set of improvements. To get something like the blue to red connector, you need that mobilization. You need to have that advocacy. Your elected officials have been great. I think they need more of your voices added to this any way that you can add to your voice. A second great and new asset that you have in this community is the Silver Line. And that provides service from Airport Station over to the South Boston waterfront. But it is inhibited by the Chelsea Street Bridge. And we ought to be working with you collaboratively to figure out how to make that Silver Line connection over the South Boston waterfront and South Station work a bit more efficiently. So I would suggest that you make that a piece of focus as you're thinking about your comments. And I think I'm out of time, but let me say one more thing. Buses. We're entering into a new environment. Within 5 years, we'll have electric buses as part of the fleet. Within 5 years, we'll have different size of buses added to the fleet. We can think about different routes. We can think about different configurations of the bus system. We have a process going on known as the Next Bus, Better Bus project. Again, you can find it online. And again, we need to understand places that we're not currently serving well by bus, places where the bus is inefficient, et cetera. So please weigh in, please talk to us, and be as loud as you possibly can, because really you're in competition for dollars with other communities around the Boston metropolitan area. So I'd be happy to continue to work with the council and the mayor's office any way I can. East Boston is still my emotional home, and hope to hear from all of you over the next number of months.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alice Brown from Boston Harbor Now.
Thank you, Councilor Wu and Councilor Edwards, for leading this hearing on the zoning initiative and master plan, and for inviting me to be here tonight. For those of you who don't know me, I am a Boston but not East Boston resident. My name is Alice Brown, and I'm the Director of Water Transportation at Boston Harbor Now. In that role, I am managing the comprehensive water transportation study for the Boston region with state support from MassDOT, Massport, the MCCA, and the Seaport Economic Council. And I also want to say, as someone who has worked on or contributed to many recent planning efforts, I want to emphasize that the transportation component of this master plan already has a strong foundation in existing plans to build off of, including hopefully the business plans that will come out of the Ferry study, as well as Go Boston 2030, Imagine Boston 2030, and the MBTA's Focus 40. It would be incredibly valuable if this planning process and the final document includes a prioritization of proposed projects and carefully developed steps for implementation. It is also significant that many of the transportation projects that affect this neighborhood are beyond its geographic borders, from proposals like the Red-Blue Connector as well as new ferry service. Within East Boston, the comprehensive water transportation study initially included 3 potential ferry terminals: the existing dock at Logan Airport, Lewis Mall, which is just south of Maverick Station, and Liberty Plaza behind the Shaws in Central Square. Given the current population density of residents and the places that they travel to work for school, for work or school, our study determined that the most promising of these 3 docks for a new inner harbor service is Lewis Mall, which will be included in the business plan for a new route that connects East Boston with Charlestown's Pier 4, with Fan Pier in the Seaport via stops at Long Wharf. Details of this plan will be released later this summer or in early fall, and we look forward to working with partners at the city and elsewhere to implement this new route and ensure that it is reliable, affordable, financially sustainable, and ADA accessible piece of the transit system for this neighborhood. To integrate the ferry both physically and in its fare structure to the multimodal networks of East Boston will require careful planning, political leadership, and ongoing community support. Boston Harbor Now looks forward to working with all of you to provide better multimodal connections to the waterfront for East Boston's residents and to bring ferry service back to the neighborhood.
Thank you, Alice. Okay, great. So that concludes the scheduled community panelists. We're going to move into public testimony now, and Councillor Edwards had prepared sign-in sheets specific to each of those 4 topics, so we'll do 5 folks off of each of those sheets and kind of rotate that way. Starting again with planning and zoning, and we'll do a 1.5-minute testimony for everyone here. Feel free, the first person testifying could stand at the podium. There are seats along the sides if you want to get ready as you're scheduled to go next. And apologies for not being able to read everyone's names. So first up is Susan, it looks like Brown, thank you. Susan will be followed by Peter Dolliber, Daniel Jensen, Jane O'Reilly, and Mike Russo.
Susan Browner. I am a preservation advocate, and what I specifically wanted to mention was the fact that in actuality, this, in regards to historic preservation, was actually excellent, and it could be actually incorporated whole cloth into our new plan. The issue is that while there were a number of excellent historic preservation ideas, not one single one was implemented. So I would hope, and I know it's not an enforcement document, that we could come up with some way that we could actually implement some of the excellent ideas in here, brought forward, and other new ones. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Peter?
I'm Peter Dolliver. My wife and I are happy to be residents of East Boston. We moved here because of the vibrant neighborhood and the diversity and the culture that is here. We're very excited to hear some of these plans and changes for the future and really appreciate the leadership in moving in that direction. My concern is between now and then. This neighborhood is being revamped by decisions made by a zoning board that is just looking at variances and not following anything that exists or following. We have...
All right, let's try to keep public applause.
We have lost too much of our neighborhood. We have lost too much of our culture, too much of our history. We have buildings building out pell-mell without any thought or consideration for the people who live here, for traffic, transportation, housing, or affordability. And I am asking something to be done now. Between when this plan is done and today, something has to be done. Stop.
Thank you. Next will be Daniel Jensen.
Tough act to follow, but I'll do my best. I live in Orient Heights. I've lived there with my wife for 3 years, recent transplants. We are in the only single-family zone neighborhood in the district, and we want to keep it that way. I appreciate any rezoning that's happening, but our neighborhood is so good, and we have been so welcomed, and we want people to live there, and we want to stay there as long as we can. So just please keep it zoned the way it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, Jane O'Reilly.
My name is Jane O'Reilly. I live in the Gumball. Tall, historic buildings surrounded by empty space, thus endangered. I'm so grateful to you for this evening. The minute I heard the word zoning by variance, I thought, yes, they're up to speed. I've been going to meetings for the 12 years I've lived here. I've lived through what I think is part feeding frenzy and part a workshop in the worst development choices possible. I would also thus like to use a stronger word. I'd like to see a moratorium. Just stop. I agree with Peter. The other thing that I haven't heard anything about that very much concerns me, although I will never live to see this. It seems to me that the airport and the coexistence with East Boston has already reached the non-viable point. And I want to hear what plans there are for regional airport and high-speed transportation. All great cities have that now. What are we, some kind of village where they have to land where their limousines are? So thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. And finally, last but not least, Mike Russo.
First off, members of the council, thank you so much for putting this evening together. This is a long overdue conversation, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak on the issue of zoning. A week ago, East Boston witnessed an epic failure of the imagination when a pair of handsome brick townhomes in Maverick Square, buildings that had survived nearly 150 years, were demolished to make way for new commercial development. A 5-minute walk from the site on Marginal Street, our harborfront is now lined with massive residential development, yet developers have disdained the idea of creating a commercial corridor here to generate points of integration between residents and residents of the new development and residents of the established community. Think about it, a hardware store, a bottle shop, a bodega, a dry cleaner. These are all points of interaction between people that already live here and the new residents of the community. That's not happening, and that's a real problem. Now let's touch for a moment on the process by which projects get approved. I don't keep track of it on a spreadsheet or anything like that, but in my narrow experience living in Orion Heights, I would say about 75% of the projects presented to our neighborhood council require the blessing of the Zoning Board of Appeals. I'll hazard a guess that the ZBA's approval rate is about 85% for everything that comes in front of them. Well, here's a pro tip. If the city's zoning requires 75% of all projects and proposals to go in front of the ZBA, well, I think the zoning might just be obsolete. Well, the BRA and the BPDA, there was just a lack of engagement with the community for many, many years. I won't hazard a guess as to why that is, but I'm looking for change in that regard, and I think many people in this room are looking for that as well. We need a comprehensive and inclusive process to make that happen. This is the first step. There are many to follow, and I look forward to being on the road with each and every one of you. Thanks again.
Thank you, Mike. Great. So everybody's doing great with the minute and 30-second time limit. That will move. There's some more zoning folks, planning and zoning, which we'll catch on the second go-around. Moving over to parks and climate resiliency, we have 2 people signed up to testify, Michelle Modica and Isabel Engulofsky. So if there are 3 more folks who feel moved at this point, even though you haven't signed up to talk specifically on parks and climate resiliency, feel free to wait over here as well, and we'll get you in after Michelle and Isabel. Is Isabel here? Okay, great.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Michelle Modica. I don't know if you know who I am, but I'm born and brought up in East Boston until I graduated from college. I left for several decades and returned 8 years ago to my family home on Haines Street in East Boston, which is 1 street over from Pier 1. You recognize me? Roberta Cave. Oh, I love when I'm in a place where, you know, there's 1 or 2 people that I recognize or recognize me, and I love all the other people too. In any event, my issue here is that we all know about the rising sea levels, as did those kayakers who had a ball at the end of the winter, you know, paddling down the streets, that I got calls from all my friends and people around the country. Oh, you're being flooded, you're being flooded. I didn't even know about it because it was too further down for me to see. In any event, it's a frightening thing. We on the East Coast especially are outpacing the whole world in terms of raising rising water levels, because of the specific geographics of the processes that govern this rising water. We're affected by that. So in 2016, the new FEMA flood records actually included hundreds more people in East Boston under the AE flood zone, which is the high probability of flooding zone. I have been in that flood zone all along, but hundreds of other people are now in that flood zone. My cost of flood insurance when I moved back 8 years ago was $500, and this year it's $3,000, a six times more expense. My taxes have tripled, and my homeowner's insurance have doubled. I got up one morning and said, I may not be able to stay here till I die, which was my intention of coming back here. And I worry about a lot of the other elderly people like myself who have a fixed income, and yet we could have a six-fold increase in something like this. I will have to move probably in 5 or 6 years if this continues. So I'm working under the auspices of Councilor Edwards' office this summer for about 3 months on a project where I will overlay the flood zone areas, extricate all the people who are actually being affected by this now, and I'm going to personally either write to them or call them, and Councilor Edwards said we'll go in people's houses and we'll ask them the devastating effect this is going to have on their near future, and mine also. And so if any of you hear from me or Councilor Edwards' office, please, invite us in, tell us how you're affected by this, and we will try to put it all together and look to the federal, state, and a city government for some kind of a monetary relief for this rising cost.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Isabel next.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for letting me speak tonight. I don't live in Boston anymore. I live in Barcelona, Spain, where I had a research lab on urban environmental justice and sustainability. I got my PhD here a few years ago in urban studies and planning. And one of the issues that we are concerned about, and that the neighborhood of East Boston also embodies, is the question of who are green and resilient neighborhood built for? Do the green and resilient infrastructure that the city of Boston is fighting for, will it benefit residents who have lived here for a long time, or will it result in displacement? And that's something very important, because we are talking about issues like climate gentrification or green gentrification, which are concepts that we've been studying in different communities around the world, including Barcelona, where I live, and Miami or Philadelphia, where basically along the line, the type of resilient infrastructure the benefits of them are being captured by or accrued by developers and gentrifiers who have such a high income that they are the only ones who are able and allowed, let's say, over time, to benefit from green infrastructure. So the question I have for the board and for everyone here is that how will we make that parks, open spaces, and green infrastructure are not just lip services to boost the city's record on new investment, new attractiveness, competitive urbanism, but actually be something that can be shared with everyone. And so in that sense, I really encourage you to also develop studies that can help follow who are the residents living next to these open space, who is able to afford the vicinity of these green areas, And also thinking about social and cultural displacement, which is something that we don't talk about a lot. Like if all of a sudden you have higher income millennials, white millennials coming into parks like Lopresti Park or other areas, and that are displacing the traditional uses of those parks or making people feel uncomfortable because of the way they are looked at, minorities or low-income residents, that you are also producing a form of social cultural displacement that over time will push people away. And finally, I'm also encouraging you, and I think this is something we will do in our lab, to also look at the long-term health effects of displacement and gentrification. We don't look at that enough. Like if parents have to work 2 or 3 jobs so that their kids can stay in their home, but then their kids are low enough to school, then these kids are also more at risk of antisocial behavior or what you will talk about. So these are really deep issues of concern for residents that I think these health impacts, again, of gentrification we're not talking about enough. So we're committed to also doing more studies on this neighborhood. We are doing it. I'm here now conducting some research, and we'll be doing it over the next year and a half. So I thank everyone who's been talking to me, and we will help document also all of these different impacts, because I think this type of data might also be helpful to create green and equitable
Thank you, Professor.
East Boston. Thank you.
I know Councillor Edwards had one announcement before we go to Kanan.
Sorry, just I forgot to announce at the very beginning that the Office of Housing Stability has some resources on the back table for those folks who are either dealing with displacement or dealing with fires, and they wanted me to make that announcement before you go. You can grab some of those materials.
Kanan Thiruvengadam, our proud representative on the Community Preservation Act Committee and also a local resident.
Thank you, Councillor Wu, and thank you, Councillor Edwards and Councillor Sabi George. The reason we're having this hearing here is because between East Boston and the rest of Boston, there's the Atlantic, right? So crossing the water to come over here, which makes it easier for people to attend the hearing. So I appreciate you doing this. But that water is what we're talking about in terms of our climate resiliency. The city did a great climate resiliency East Boston program, but that is highly partial. It was only taking into consideration one effect of climate change, which is coastal flooding. Flooding that results from storm surge and high tide and things like that. But climate change can also result in extreme precipitation. We experienced that last September in Orion Heights. There was a mudslide. If it had been any worse, it would have affected a lot of foundations. So there are other effects that were not taken into consideration, and that should be for it to be a more complete picture. Also in Climate Ready East Boston, it was only a part of the geography of the island that was taken into consideration. So the southern part, Jeffrey's Point, there's a lot more to East Boston, as we know. So in terms of climate resiliency, if the city could just be true to the spirit of all the programs that it's already discussing, that itself would be great. For example, we're talking about carbon-free Boston. And all the buildings that are being added add carbon. They don't reduce carbon, right? So if we could say to the developers, all right, you're trying to house people, that's great, but how can you help us reduce carbon? How can you help us reduce waste? Yourself, can you do some waste management yourself? And maybe you can help the neighborhood with some waste management. So carbon, waste, and also in general, being sensitive of all the climate resiliency for all the developers. Even if it's permitted already, I don't see any reason why that should wait. It is incumbent upon the city to educate the developers and to push them to say, for the sake of your own people, the people who are going to reside in your own development, and for the sake of the neighborhood, you need to be more resilient and planning towards resiliency. We are living on the brink already. People may not realize that. 2 days ago, the water level was 12.3 feet, and Boston's flood stage is 12.5. So we're like this close all the time when there's the high tide. And the high tide is bringing us very close to our flood stage. 4 days ago, it was 12.45 feet. So it was, in fact, flooding on Lewis Street. So people don't realize this. It's happening very silently because it is the sea level is rising, and the high tide is already bringing the ocean to the neighborhood. And on top of that, when there's a storm, it just gets much worse.
Thank you very much, Kana.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I know we'll welcome up Giordana. We have room for one more person in this Parks and Climate Resiliency category. If anyone feels moved, please make your way over while Giordana is speaking.
So thank you, councilors, for making this wonderful rezoning change and all of the iPods and iPads happen all as well. Really, we as residents very much appreciate it. I think my sort of concern is from an environmental justice perspective. You know, what are the things that are affecting our neighborhood? from an environmental justice perspective, where what are the things in our neighborhood that affect us negatively? And if I'm going to think about that, it's the effects of the airport, both from a noise perspective as well as from an environmental air quality perspective. And then there's the gas tanks. All of the gas tanks right along the harbor. From a climate change perspective, what happens when they start to flood, and all of the runoff from those gas tanks that litter the entirety of the Chelsea Creek, what happens then? So thinking about zoning as not just necessarily just buildings and the effects of buildings, and whether or not we're going to have bow fronts torn down, or let's think about our community holistically and look at all of the negative things that affect us as residents, and see whether or not we can actually use zoning to change those as well. Is zoning something that we can do? Is zoning affected? Does zoning actually do anything to airport buildings? I don't know the answer to that, but is this something that, does zoning, is that part of the process? So the answer is no. Is that something we can make happen? And then also, with the gas tanks along the waterfront, both from a climatological perspective as well as from a, water absorption standpoint, is that something that we can zone? Can we zone them out? And if we can't zone them out, is there something else that the city council and all of our elected representatives actually take care of those sorts of things? And then also the substation. It doesn't make sense for a giant electrical thing to be that close to the Chelsea Creek, which is also in this giant flood zone. So thank you very much for taking this on, and we appreciate all your work.
Thank you. All right. Yep. So last one for Parks and Climate Resiliency. Could you please introduce yourself for the record?
Sure. My name is Taylor Garr. I've been teaching science at Excel Academy for the last 7 years, and along with Conan, I'm on the board of Eastie Farm. I just want to build on what's been said. I want to acknowledge what John Walkie said earlier about community outreach and the importance of that being proactive and not just passively creating opportunities, but actually going out into the community to solicit input. And I just wanted to make the point that the different topics that we're exploring at this meeting, which thank you so much for proposing this meeting and giving us this chance, these topics are not isolated or in competition with each other. We really need to be looking at not just responding to problems, but setting out a vision for this plan that marries solutions across all of these topics and kills multiple birds with one stone, but not actually killing birds. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, so that concludes this round for Parks and Climate Resiliency. Moving to housing and affordability. So far, the only person we have signed up is Gloribel Rivas. Again, we have room for 4 more after her, if folks want to make their way over to the chairs on the side.
Hi, my name is Gloria Rivas. I'm here with Neighbors United for a Better East Boston, New Bay. And I just want to make a few comments regarding the issues of definitions over affordable and inclusionary development policy. So a lot of, and I think this happens in a lot of communities around the city, but according to the Boston Planning Development Agency, the affordable units that they tend to build typically target households earning between 70 and 100% of the area median income. The area median income, as many of you know, is calculated using the incomes of various towns and not just East Boston, meaning that you also calculate cities that earn a lot more money on average. So the Boston Planning and Development Agency also published trends about East Boston in which they stated that the median household income in East Boston in 2015 was $51,549. Taken into comparison, I think they gathered this data from the census, so I think this would be $51,549 for a 4-member household. In comparison, the area median income for the entire Boston area for 4 people, 100% AMI would be approximately $107,800. Meaning that the median income of East Boston is 50% of the around 50% of the AMI. So affordable units in East Boston should target households earning between 30 and 50% AMI. In addition, they should also find there should also be alternative ways to screen prospective tenants that don't require social security numbers or credit scores, because these screening tactics negatively impact the immigrant community. As we know, more than 50% of East Boston's population is foreign-born. New Bay had a screening for a short film by Brian Madrigal, who, like me, immigrated to East Boston when he was 5 years old. And so a lot of these, after displacement, a lot of immigrant families have a lot of issues finding new housing opportunities in East Boston. Particularly, vouchers are not a good, necessarily a good way of helping these displaced immigrant families, because whether documented or not, immigrant families are discouraged by their attorneys from accepting public assistance because it might negatively affect the outcomes of their applications when they try to adjust statuses. So these are just some of the things that we think inclusionary development policy and any plans for East Boston going forward concerning housing should take into consideration. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbel. Last call for housing and affordability. Anyone wish to speak on housing and affordability? Feel free to come up, please. And could you please introduce your name and any organization?
My name is Claudia Sierra, and I'm a resident of East Boston. And I'm just here to talk about an issue that I had already brought up to the City Council. My concern about the guidelines for developers for affordable housing and how many units, when they build certain amount of units, they have to designate a certain number for affordable housing. But what happens to the developers that these guys buy in, scatter 3 families, and they amount to any amount of units from 2 to 300 in East Boston specifically, and they are not being they're not being asked to be responsible to create affordable housing out of those scattered units. So I would like to see something done about this and perhaps include it in the plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madeline?
Hi there, my name's Madeline Stachinsky. I'm the co-founder and director of Zoomix, and I'm a resident of East Boston for 27 years. I didn't expect to speak on this topic. I was hoping that we might get around to creative youth development or workforce development for young people. But I'm very passionate about this particular topic because it affects all of the young people in my organization. I work with young people ages 7 through 18 and have for 27 years, first out of my home, then out of the old Cardinals Nest, which unfortunately was torn down last week, and now out of the Sumner Street Fire Station. And it has been my incredible honor and pleasure to work with so many brilliant young people in this neighborhood and to see their passion and to see their educational and learning journey unfold. And one of the things that allows them to participate in after-school programs is that they can afford to live in this neighborhood, and it's a safe neighborhood, and it's a neighborhood with great schools and other opportunities. I've seen in the last 5 years the pressure on our families just continue to mount, where our staff who are not trained to do housing support or core supports, even food and security supports, are being pulled towards that because we have relationships with kids and their families, and we see them, the incredible amount of stress that they're going under when they all of a sudden get an eviction notice or a notice that their rent is doubling in price. So we've been doing a lot of work that's outside of our realm of expertise to try and help people. We've worked with the East Boston CDC, that's been great. We've worked with City Life Vida Urbana, which has been great. But we definitely want more support in this area, so thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. My name is Fred Pacillo. I'm a resident of Orion Heights and a property owner there. Own a triple-decker and rent 2 units. I'm also president of the Congregation of Our Savior's Lutheran Church in Maverick Square. And I just wanted to echo some of the concerns already raised about affordability in this neighborhood. And I think it was Andres Del Castillo maybe who said keeping the fabric of the community. I don't want to be uninviting of new people at all. I think, there's been enough of that to go around. Inviting the new young folks that want to live in this neighborhood is a good thing. But if we want to preserve what makes this neighborhood special, I think we have to pay particular attention to that. I was disheartened to see the Just Cause legislation not go anywhere in the State House. And as we move forward with this master plan, I don't know specifically where things are related to Suffolk Downs. I know we need the housing desperately. I appreciate Mr. O'Brien HYM's position that, wanting to maintain some open space, quite a bit of it. I've been to one of their meetings. I liked a lot of what I heard, but I'm also very concerned about what that's going to do to the average rent in this neighborhood when we add all those units. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they're going to put in the bare minimum of affordable housing. That could be wrong, but I think they're doing the bottom line there. And especially if something like Amazon comes with the salaries that are going to be paid there. But even without that, so just raising that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we had room for one more to round out this section if someone was.
If I may.
Yep.
Hi, Chris Markey again on resiliency. I did have the occasion to work very deeply when I was working at Neighborhood of Affordable Housing on the resiliency topic. And I just want to say that when we're talking about affordability and displacement, I think that that's where resiliency comes back into the picture. A community can't be resilient if people cannot be safe and secure and knowing that they have economic vitality in their family to afford the rents they have to pay. And one idea is that if we're going to establish a new vision for resiliency in the city, that we need to incorporate affordability and displacement into that issue. One way that that can be done is we can recognize that there is a crumbling housing stock in our neighborhoods. If the city were to create innovative programs which would identify buildings that need to be replaced, and then offer a comprehensive system for landlords that their tenants can be taken and put into transitional housing while those buildings are torn down, and then the same benefits which are given to the developers in terms of relief for zoning could be then applied to these new resilient buildings that could be built. And so the new standard is 4 or 5 stories. We could create new additional housing units, and the city could then restrict those units to a certain percentage of annual average income or whatnot. And it would be purely at the discretion of the homeowner if they wanted to take this on. So I'm not advocating for rent control, but I'm advocating for creative planning around how do we create a resilient city and solve displacement issues at the same time.
Thank you very much. Okay, great. So we will move into traffic and transportation. Signed up, we have Luke Tarby, Roberta Markey, and Kevin Heffernan, and then space for 2 more folks who might feel moved to speak.
Great. Thank you to our city councilors, and thank you to everybody for staying here. A kind of muggy auditorium, so I prepared some remarks. So my name is Luke Tarby, and my family owns the 3-story brick building at 2 Lexington Street, which is at the corner of Lexington and Border. My family's been part of the community for over 100 years and immigrated from Italy in 1907 to East Boston. And my grandfather, great uncle, and other Italian-American entrepreneurs founded the East Boston Times at the end of World War II, which still exists to this day. What I'd like to talk about today is kind of the 3rd-generation owner in East Boston, is the importance of a viable water ferry terminal at Liberty Plaza and to provide useful water transportation options to residents in East Boston who seek to travel to downtown or to Charlestown. I know we talked about Lewis Mall, which is great, but the truth is that the Lewis Mall stop is just a few hundred feet from the Maverick Square T stop. And I think when we think about water transportation, we need to think about equity and equity for people who don't already live in the booming Maverick Square neighborhood, but also live in Eagle Hill and want easy access to downtown or to Charlestown. The three reasons, and I'll be brief because I know I'm on a schedule, the three reasons why I believe this water ferry stop must be incorporated into the master plan for East Boston. Number one, the city needs to make good on its promises. This has actually been part of the plan since 1998 and probably earlier, and I've submitted those plans to the city councilors under Mayor Menino. It was a great idea then, it's a great idea now, but it's been 20 years and perhaps more since we've been talking about this ferry stop in Central Square. It's one of the best ways to go after traffic congestion in the city if you give people a viable way to commute via water transportation. Number two, we've been talking about climate change. I think everybody remembers the city of Houston was unable to evacuate this past year because the roads would have been too clogged. One of the ways that we can think about water transportation is as a means of evacuation in the case of an emergency to pull people up the Mystic River and into Medford, especially for people who don't own cars, right? And so this is another use of ferries. Lastly, and I know I'm over time, so my apologies, we can use existing assets and resources to run this, because we already have the Charlestown Ferry. So it's just a matter of adding an extra stop in Liberty Plaza. The ferry already exists, the crew already exists, the schedule already exists. So I think by doing this, it's an affordable option. We can keep prices low. I think they're at $3, and that way it's equitable to everybody who lives in the northwestern part of East Boston. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. Roberta?
I just want to say I've lived in East Boston my whole life, and I'm so happy that the community is as it is tonight. And I love the way it's turned out. We have beautiful greenways to walk and beach areas. It's never been as good as it is now, and that goes for the population too. I love having all the mixture of the population that we have now. It makes everything beautiful. What I wanted to say originally, I wanted to complain about the traffic, because all the streets are just so clogged in the mornings. I mean, I'm lucky I'm retired, so I don't have to beat the traffic every morning, but I had to go to a doctor's appointment maybe a month ago, and I had to be there by 9 o'clock. So I was wound up in the 8:30 traffic coming into the tunnel. And all of the little streets that pour down to the tunnel, every single one of them, because I was weaving around and trying to find a fast way to go, every one of them was backed up. And I thought to myself, how can all the people who live here get into their cars and go down to the tunnel? And I know a lot of young people that are moving into the community say, oh, we don't want a car. My own daughter, Regina, who lives in New York, she says, we don't need cars. We can walk. We're strong, and we can take the T. But as soon as you reach marriageable age and you have kids, all of a sudden, you begin to think you need cars. So something has to be done for the traffic, and I'm just happy that we have all this expertise here to help us figure it out. That's all I have to say. I just want to say thank you to Lydia. It was a great idea. And East Boston is made up of neighborhoods. And if you want to solve a problem, go to the neighborhoods. Take the salami approach. Cut it up in little pieces, and we can solve all the problems, bring them together, and that's the way I would advise you.
Thank you very much. Kevin.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Kevin Heffernan. I live on Chelsea Street. I've owned my house for 20 years. I want to mirror what this young lady just said about the tunnel, because I wasn't going to talk about that, but I have two issues with transportation. I commute to Watertown every day, and I sit at the end of, well, sometimes it's backed up all the way down Chelsea Street just to get into the tunnel. I don't know what the plan is for all that construction going on for the tunnel entrance, but hopefully when that's done, it's going to relieve that. That block the box business doesn't work because there's no one there enforcing it, so it's all gridlock. Anyway, my major issue, and I've been fighting City Hall on this issue since March, is resident parking. For some reason, there are various streets in East Boston that have signage that reads, current site, 2-hour limit between the hours of 8 and 6 a.m., Monday through Friday, except resident sticker. This is not only confusing, but leads to multiple out-of-state cars and those without residence stickers parking for extended hours, overnight, and sometimes for days on end without incident. I have not seen anybody given a ticket, especially on my block between Maverick Square and the tunnel on Chelsea Street. I don't know what, I've talked to City Hall, I've talked to the parking clerk, I went to the mayor's office, I didn't get to meet with anybody because I was turned away, and wondering why there's no enforcement of this parking. Myself and other residents on my street put together a petition asking for resident parking to be restored on our block. We have submitted that, or we submitted it several months ago, or over a month ago. We haven't heard anything. So my issue is, why do we have this signage? And if you're going to have it, at least enforce it. And if not, let's go back to resident parking only. Thank you.
And I just wanted to address the petition. I just got it tonight, so I don't know who you submitted it to, but I just got it tonight. So I want to say that we will be on it, but we just got it.
Okay. Next up, Madeline, did you want to speak again? Okay, Margaret.
Good evening. My name is Margaret Farmer. I live on Webster Street. I'm currently a board member for the East Boston Chamber of Commerce, and I'm on the board of the Eastie Farm. I just wanted to encourage, as we think about this master plan, that we think about transportation from a holistic approach, that we think about connectivity. Water ferries are a wonderful option. I'm a huge supporter, and I thank Boston Harbor Now for being here. But we need to make sure that they connect to bus routes. We need to make sure that they're also on bike lanes. We need to make sure that they're easily accessible by everyone. It's very rare that someone uses just one mode of transportation, and being able to easily transfer from one to the other will significantly increase how much they're used. I'd also like to say we want people to use less cars, but we make it incredibly difficult. I would love to have access to a zip car, but finding them in my neighborhood is very difficult. I know it's very hard to find spaces, but there must be some ways that we could encourage developers to either support alternative transportation through maybe bike racks, scooter parking, or even offering zip cars on site. So, thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on traffic and transportation? Yes.
My name is Kathy Hubin, and I live on Chelsea Street, which is a snow emergency street. There is no place for residents to move their cars when there is a snow emergency in East Boston. And it's becoming more and more of a problem because the people who don't want to have cars anymore are parking on the street. And it's becoming critical. I've had people tell me that they've driven around for 2 hours looking for a place to park, and there isn't any. I also would like to divert a little and say that I think the master plan is wonderful, but I also agree that something needs to be done now. In my block, they are building, and that have been approved, approximately 60 units. There is a commercial business that had a parking lot that's moving across the street that has no parking. Their customers will arrive between 4 and 7 p.m., time when people come home from work. We have constantly opposed, gone to meetings, and that's the other thing I want to convey, that I think that, especially with older residents, there's a sense of despair that they're not being heard. Trying to get them to meetings is almost impossible because they say, why should we go? They're going to do what they want to do anyway. So that creates a problem. And in my block, your master plan is great, but I think it's a day late and a dollar short. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Chris, is it okay if we just, I know I want to get through the next planning and zoning, and I want to hear from folks who haven't spoken yet.
I think that Airport Impact Relief Incorporated should make some sort of statement about transportation while we're talking about an East Boston master plan, so it's all right? I do.
I want to make sure we get through the next, if we have time at the end, then I'll
Are we going off of transportation then? And we're not
No, we did the 5 for transportation, so we finished those. I'm going to go back now to planning and zoning and do the 5 there, and then we'll see if anyone else still wants to speak, or if the lights are going to just cut out on us at that point. So back to planning and zoning. The folks I have signed up for the second round are Priscilla O'Brien. Kathy, did you want to speak again for this, or you're fine? Okay, great. Charlie Lagrasso, Carl Swanson, and Maureen White.
Charlie?
Those are the, so we're just cycling through now, those 4 topics. Okay, Maureen, go ahead, since you're up first.
Hi, counselors. Hi, neighbors. I'm Maureen White. I live on the very best street in East Boston, which is Haynes Street. And, yeah, fighting words. Thank you so much, Councilor Edwards, for making this happen. I think any of us who've been to a zoning board of appeals hearing and have seen the way that they hand out variances like Halloween candy are very pleased that we are looking at the zoning. I also just learned recently that 90% of the zoning variances that get challenged in court in Boston are actually overturned because they were granted illegally. So I think we really have a lot of challenges to address around zoning and displacement, transportation, the environment, and lots of equity issues. But I actually wanted to just say a word about process, and I was so happy that some other folks here mentioned not just, the content of their concerns, but they talked about process. And I think that is so crucial in a neighborhood as diverse as this, that we pay very careful attention to who is participating in a process as important as this, that will determine the future of our neighborhood. And also, once we get, different people together, it's the question of how. What are we doing? I have a dream that we actually start to make our neighborhood planning processes look a little different, like where we could actually sit in ways that we can look at each other in the eye and talk about our values, like what's important to us as a community. We always skip over that part of the conversation and go right to debating, policies or debating the look of the windows on a particular building, and we don't get to the heart of the matter. What is our vision for the future of this community and what's important to us? And I think that a lot of really interesting questions have been raised by my neighbors here tonight. How should we define affordability when we talk about housing? Or, what would it look like to address the parking issue in a way that, is good for the environment and good for folks that need cars because of accessibility issues and things like that? And we raise these questions and then we never get a chance to sit down together and grapple with them. So I would just love to see some innovative ideas in process. These kinds of hearings, I know they're necessary, but they don't actually help us all that much to really sit with our neighbors and engage around that. I'm happy to be a resource. I have 20 years of experience doing community organizing and public engagement and process design and facilitation. So, there's other folks like me in the community as well. So please call on us and let's think outside the box about how we're sitting down together to vision and to plan.
Thank you, Maureen. Before Kathy, are Priscilla, Charlie, or Carl still here and interested? Already, okay. Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I have one more thing. Yeah. I think it's very difficult when you go to the association meetings and a developer is making a presentation on the development and you see his slide up there and you look at parking and they're building 1/3 of what the city requires, and they're looking for that variance. Well, I challenged the developer, and I said, how do you justify 1/3 of what the city will require? The answer was because we're going to have a beautiful retail space. Well, that impacts the quality of life. The lack of parking impacts the quality of life here in this city, where it's a trade-off. Where does the retail space come in? And how does the retail space support itself if no one can park near it? So this is what people are facing when they go to these meetings. And another time, the woman that owned a property that was having a development across the street, she got up and she said to the developer, I understand and you're going to do what you're going to do. But I've lived here all my life. And the sense of despair from that woman and other people in the room was awful. That's what's going on.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else on planning and zoning? Seeing no takers, then is there anyone else who is interested in speaking on any of the 4 topics? I know Chris was waiting patiently, so feel free to come on up. On transportation, any other folks? Okay, so you'll close out the night for us. Thank you.
Hi, folks. I need my glasses, so let me get them. This last one is sort of quickly written on my cell phone. I ran into a time pinch earlier today. But I'm also volunteering with Airport Impact Relief Incorporated for now about 20 years, and I would like to make a comment on their behalf. East Boston members have fought for transportation justice now for almost 50 years. While East Boston residents have fought for our city's environmental rights for decades, all too often we have fought alone. It hasn't been since the White administration 30 years ago, where we had strong support from our city government, up against incredible and often not credible claims of economic benefit made by Logan Airport's operators, Massport. Local residents' calls for transportation justice and for innovations have often gone ignored, and they don't only get ignored by Massport, but they're ignored by the city. Any master planning process that we engage in can't ignore the elephant in the room. Nevertheless, our booming economy, combined with our existing transportation crisis, demands attention after these many years to be turned to the red to blue connector, bus rapid transit, a functional fast-moving ferry transportation system, and a complete overhaul of our street system via a thorough community-wide traffic survey which focuses on resolving our growing morning commuter congestion problem by restricting access to our streets if necessary and limiting options for commuters to protect local East Boston residents. But back to the airport, with a 360% increased childhood asthma rate, 200% more COPD in East Boston, 300% more autism, and a host of other chronic diseases prevalent in East Boston as a direct result of Logan Airport's aviation and ground transportation activities, the City of Boston must engage with East Boston residents in the honest and open-minded assessment of the costs and the benefits of this airport. Airport expansion is rampant right now, and the City of Boston is doing nothing to defend the people of East Boston. The city must commit legal, technical, and financial resources to this matter immediately, such that resolution of the complex and layered multi-generational problem can be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you. And I saw Margaret had one final word.
Okay, huge shout out to everybody who's made it to the end. I'll be fast, I promise. Number one issue that hasn't been mentioned this evening is the fact that we are in dire need of a middle school here in East Boston. And that is something that I do believe should be incorporated into a master plan, making sure that we're able to meet the needs of our students as we move forward. The other issue I'd like to bring forward is that if there's any way to ensure that the zoning decisions that we made are carried out and respected, we do have a robust planning process here in East Boston, and I have watched the ZBA meetings sometimes, and they have passed every single project. So every single project has gone past, regardless of whether the community supports it or not. And that is incredibly frustrating to know that there have been meeting after meeting, months, letters, the community has turned out to let their voices be known and make sure that the city knows how we feel, and then it is tossed aside in the matter of seconds. And it makes me angry. And so, thank you. So I would just like to say if there's anything that we can do so that as this process is implemented, we ensure that the city listens to us and we make sure that what we want happens, I'd like to see that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margaret. Okay, we've made it to the end. I want to hand it over to my colleagues for a final word, starting with Councilor Nisa Sabi-George.
I do want to echo what Margaret just said. Thank you for staying until the end. These meetings do get long, but what you have shared tonight is valuable, and I'm confident that our colleagues who either weren't able to stay or join us tonight will watch the video, because we will rave about the wealth and certainly passion of information that was shared this evening. My notes are long. I know my colleagues' notes are long, and just a tremendous amount shared, and I really appreciate everyone's voice, and for Lydia for organizing tonight, Michelle for hosting, but for really creating a setting where everyone and all of these different organizations are able to be represented and share their thoughts very efficiently in 2 minutes, too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Sabi-George. Councilor Lydia Edwards.
Again, thank you for all of you who have stayed so far. I'm just incredibly proud of this community and that you showed up, and that we're all out here to the very end. And I just want to thank you so much for that. To the administration, I want to thank you also for staying to the very end. And also to note, I think this is an opportunity for a wonderful new beginning and a way for planning and process. I hope it sets an example actually for other communities, and how, this community invited and I think really initiated and wanted the master plan. And here you are wonderfully here to help us, to hear from us, and to really hear from all the ingredients that we think are necessary, the good, the bad, and some of the deep concerns. And that's community, that's process. I look forward to really breaking the mold actually on community process. I know that other communities that you're working with now with planning are in different kinds of conversations, and I think we're going to set a new standard in a new way, and I think we're going to do it together. So thank you so much for staying here. Thank again to the administration, to Mayor Marty Walsh again for supporting this idea as well.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. So thank you, everyone. I mean, this is what I love about city government, different people coming together to make all different views to make our neighborhood, our city, our community better. This concludes docket number 0720, order for hearing regarding an East Boston zoning initiative and master plan.